As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the arid landscape, the U.S.-Mexico border remained a volatile zone. The once serene stretches of land that separated two nations had transformed into a battleground, marked by rising cartel influence and violence. Reports of skirmishes, drug trafficking, and human smuggling had surged over the past few years, leaving local communities on edge and law enforcement scrambling to respond. The tranquil life that ranchers once enjoyed was now punctuated by fear. Families who had lived on these lands for generations found themselves caught in a web of crime that seemed to tighten with each passing day. The pervasive threat from drug cartels had shifted from sporadic encounters to regular clashes, forcing residents to adapt their routines around potential violence. For many, the border was no longer just a line separating two countries. It was a front line where the stakes were life and death. In this context of unrest, ranchers became unlikely warriors in their own right. Stripped of their safety and peace of mind, they were compelled to protect their livelihoods against an enemy that operated with ruthless efficiency. Each day brought new stories of encounters: cattle rustling attributed to cartel members looking for quick cash, homes broken into under the cover of darkness, and even confrontations that left behind not just property damage but also emotional scars. The increasing cartel presence revealed itself in various forms: armed groups patrolling nearby roads or suspicious vehicles lingering too long near ranch gates. Many ranchers installed surveillance cameras and reinforced their properties with fences topped with barbed wire, but these measures often felt like mere band-aids on a growing wound. The desperation grew as they realized that traditional law enforcement struggled to keep pace with the escalating violence and sophistication of these organized criminals. Amidst this chaos emerged stories of resilience and bravery. While some ranchers chose to abandon their homes in search of safety elsewhere, others stood firm, unwilling to let fear dictate their lives. They formed informal networks, sharing intelligence about cartel movements and pooling resources for self-defense. Yet even in solidarity, there was a palpable tension. No one knew when, or if, they might face an armed confrontation. As tensions simmered below the surface, national discussions regarding border security took center stage. Politicians debated policy changes while citizens demanded action against the growing threat posed by criminal organizations. Some called for increased federal presence along the border, additional agents to patrol the area, while others advocated for community-led initiatives where local knowledge could enhance security efforts. In this charged atmosphere came tales that echoed through small towns. Stories of ordinary individuals stepping up as guardians against outside threats. Among them was one particularly intriguing figure, a local rancher whose past remained shrouded in mystery yet hinted at extraordinary potential. Little did anyone know that he possessed skills honed under extreme pressure as an ex-Delta Force sniper. His training had equipped him not only with marksmanship but also with strategic thinking critical for survival in hostile environments. The rancher had always kept his past hidden. It was easier that way, safer too. He blended into the fabric of rural life, tending cattle during the day and enjoying quiet evenings under starlit skies without revealing his true identity. Yet beneath this facade lay deep reservoirs of experience waiting to be tapped should circumstances arise. As news spread about recent cartel activities, the brazen attacks on neighboring properties and threats made against those who resisted, a prevailing sense of dread lingered over his ranch. The isolation that had once provided comfort now felt like a double-edged sword. It offered privacy, but heightened vulnerability as well. What would happen when the inevitable clash occurred? Would he remain just another victim or rise as an unexpected defender? These questions loomed large as both ranchers and cartels prepared for an impending confrontation destined to shift the balance within this borderland saga forever. As night fell across the horizon, a heavy silence settled upon the land. A storm was brewing just beyond sight's reach. An unseen battle waited to unfold between those defending their home ground and those intent on claiming it by force, each side unaware that fate would soon weave together their stories in ways neither could foresee. At first glance, Jake Larson appeared to be just another border rancher, a rugged man in his 40s with sun-bronzed skin and calloused hands from years of hard work. He spent his days tending to the cattle that grazed under the expansive sky, his strong frame moving with an ease that belied the weight he carried, both in physical labor and emotional scars. His weathered face framed a pair of piercing blue eyes that held stories untold, secrets buried deep within layers of daily routine. He was known in town as the reclusive yet dependable rancher who always offered help when needed, whether it was fixing a neighbor's fence or lending tools for repairs. Yet behind this facade of normalcy lay an extraordinary past, one that he had chosen to leave behind, discarded like the unwanted remnants of a life irrevocably altered by war. Before settling into this quiet corner of the world, Jake had lived an entirely different existence. A decorated veteran, he was once part of an elite Delta Force unit specializing in counterterrorism operations around the globe. With each mission, he had faced life-and-death situations, relying on skills honed through rigorous training and sheer willpower. Those years taught him more than just how to shoot. They instilled strategic thinking, the ability to remain calm under pressure, and a profound understanding of human psychology. While many might recoil at the memories of combat and conflict, Jake compartmentalized those experiences, allowing them to inform his actions in ways few could comprehend. The transition from warfare to rural life was not as effortless as it looked. Initially drawn to the peace and isolation the ranch offered, Jake found himself grappling with haunting memories during long nights. His experiences in tense encounters left indelible marks on his conscience, the faces of comrades lost in battle replaying behind closed eyelids like a late-night film reel each time he heard distant gunshots echo in the mountains or caught wind of cartel activity nearby. Those memories surged back like a tide threatening to drown him. To cope with this internal struggle, Jake immersed himself in ranching, focusing intensely on cattle management, land maintenance, and even learning how to operate heavy equipment. The routine gave him a sense of purpose and control while allowing him moments where time ceased to matter, a welcome reprieve from chaos. That he invested in creating a sustainable source for his livelihood, planting hardy crops alongside grazing land and ensuring every blade of grass thrived. Yet it was during these mundane tasks that Jake's soldier instincts surfaced unexpectedly. He became keenly aware of every sound in nature. The rustle of leaves could mean deer passing through or worse, a foreign presence encroaching upon his land. His heightened awareness often led him to develop early warning systems around his property. Well-placed cameras and motion sensors linked via solar power allowed him to monitor long stretches of land without stepping outside unnecessarily. Despite harboring these dormant skills forged through years of tactical training, Jake avoided discussions about his past whenever neighbors pried too deeply. During casual conversations, the ranch served not merely as a retreat but as a sanctuary where he could redefine himself away from labels forged by war. Most locals knew him only as the quiet guy down by the river, blissfully unaware that he possessed expertise that could level the playing field should danger find its way onto his property. As cartel violence escalated along the border, shadows fell over more than just ranches. They crept into Jake's once peaceful existence. With each report of neighboring farms attacked or residents intimidated into submission by cartel members lurking nearby, tensions began intertwining history with present-day fears. Now confronted with external threats escalating toward violence daily, though masked in unpredictability, he understood that being just another rancher wasn't enough anymore. The specter of confrontation loomed large over not only his life but also those whose lives depended on their ability to band together against common enemies threatening their homes. As night wrapped around the border landscape with stars breaking through darkness overhead, a familiar resolve stirred within him. Old instincts began whispering things long kept silent. Jake felt it was time to shed more than just light over lingering shadows. It was time for him to emerge from hiding and defend all he held dear, not merely as a farmer but as someone trained for battle when all roads converged upon conflict's inevitable path. The ranch lay sprawled across the rugged terrain of the borderlands, a patchwork quilt of browns and greens stitched together by the ribbons of dusty trails that meandered through it. Towering mountains framed the horizon, their peaks dusted with snow even in the warmth of summer, while the expansive sky above shifted from cerulean blue to shades of fiery orange as dusk approached. In this remote landscape, isolation wrapped around the ranch like a comforting embrace, a quality that had once brought Jake Larson peace but now foreshadowed impending danger. Nestled away from bustling highways and urban chaos, Jake's sanctuary was bordered by sprawling stretches of untouched land. Dotted with mesquite trees and prickly pear cacti, the vast openness allowed for breathtaking views but also served as a double-edged sword. While it provided solitude from prying eyes, it simultaneously offered a perfect landscape for those with ill intentions to approach unseen. The haunting beauty of the terrain belied its harsh realities, where each rustle of foliage could signal wildlife or invaders creeping closer under the cover of darkness. The ranch itself was modest yet functional. A weathered farmhouse stood at its center, painted in fading white and surrounded by wooden fences that had seen better days. The gravel driveway wound past fields where cattle grazed lazily or dashed away in fright at sudden sounds, a reminder of their vulnerability amidst ongoing turmoil. Each morning, Jake would rise early to tend to his animals, gripped by the gnawing anxiety that accompanied his duties. Every creak of the house or distant gunshot would send his senses into high alert. To the east lay an expanse of grazing land that seemed endless, dotted with occasional patches of wildflowers that dared to bloom despite the relentless sun. This fertile ground was hard-won but provided sustenance not only for his livestock but also for neighbors who relied on him for support. Yet now, as cartel activity increased in neighboring areas, these same lands felt less like a refuge and more like a target. The remoteness of Jake's ranch had often been viewed as an asset. After all, out here he could escape society's pressures and reconnect with nature. In those serene moments beneath an endless sky, he found solace in mundane routines, mending fences or tending crops while listening to birdsong. Now, however, that solitude transformed into isolation on a precarious precipice where danger lurked just beyond sight. The very elements he had cherished, the silence and expanse, now amplified fears about potential threats enveloping him. Rumors spread like wildfire among nearby ranchers, tales of cartel members brazenly crossing into American territory to claim what they wanted without regard for law or lives. With visibility limited across miles of wide-open space, every shadow cast during twilight felt laden with dread, a reminder that anyone could be watching from afar. Jake's heart raced at the thought that these menacing figures could emerge from the hills at any moment, hidden behind boulders or camouflaged in thorny bushes. As dusk settled into nightfall over the ranchland, stars twinkling amid a darkening sky, Jake gazed out over his property with renewed determination despite simmering anxiety flooding his mind. He began to recognize how advantageous this isolation could be if he chose to leverage it properly against any intruders looking to take advantage of his solitude. His years spent honing skills in varied environments informed this realization. He understood how to use terrain strategically and blend into shadows when necessary. Stillness enveloped everything around him as night cloaked the landscape, a thick blanket muffling sound and scent alike. It was within this mysterious realm that Jake prepared himself mentally for whatever came next. Adrenaline surged within him as instincts sharpened, a mix driven by fear but also forged through unwavering resolve. His ranch might have been vulnerable on its own, but what could happen when added together? An unyielding spirit rose alongside memories long buried deep beneath layers of time. The isolation may be daunting, yet it also became a battleground where he would reclaim control, not just over land lost but over life itself. As stars flickered vibrantly overhead against an infinite backdrop, whispers carried forth among ancient silhouettes. They spoke not just of danger lurking nearby but resilience within himself waiting to be unleashed when conflict inevitably arrived at his doorstep. The motivations driving the cartel's interest in Jake Larson's ranch were multifaceted and dangerously intertwined, revealing a web of greed, power struggles, and a thirst for retribution. At the core of their agenda lay the sprawling networks of drug smuggling that crisscrossed through the borderlands, with ranches like Jake's strategically positioned along these paths. This geographic significance made his property an enticing target, a place to either establish a foothold or eliminate a threat. Control of territory was everything in this lawless expanse. The border itself had become porous, and drug cartels exploited this weakness to funnel narcotics into the states. Ranch locations along vital routes provided logistical advantages. They offered hideouts for stash houses where shipments could be stored before being distributed to larger urban markets. By taking over properties like Jake's, cartels could eliminate competition and ensure a more seamless operation while simultaneously expanding their reign of terror over vulnerable communities. Yet the cartels were not merely invaders seeking terrain, they were also vying to instill fear. An essential aspect of their strategy to assert dominance over anyone who dared oppose or even question their authority. By showing force against ranchers who resisted their encroachments, they reinforced a narrative of intimidation that held sway in the minds of local residents. As those tales spread from one farm to another, they served their aim completely, discouraging resistance and steering entire neighborhoods away from interacting with law enforcement or speaking out against organized crime. However, lurking beneath the surface of pragmatic motivations lay a deeper, more personal vendetta against Jake himself. Having spent years as an elite soldier capable of holding his ground under fire, his past did not go unnoticed by those who operated within the shadowy depths of cartel culture. In previous assignments closer to his military days, Jake had been involved in operations aimed at curtailing cartel activities globally. Many within these organizations had likely crossed paths with him before. The very skills that enabled him to offer protection now painted him as a target, a man deserving retribution for interference in their affairs. Rumors flickered like wildfire through criminal circles concerning the rancher who once fought his enemies overseas but had since turned into an unintended obstacle for them on home soil. There was no denying it, the cartel thus held briefly onto his life story as fuel for a twisted narrative, making him both prey and adversary fused into one identity by faceless figures roaming through desolate lands. As dusk settled back into night over Jake's property, so too hung memories forged through past encounters between cartel members faced off by soldiers like himself before, just maybe serving as fodder for future conflicts brewing ahead. Given that past connections would be brought forward now tainted by resentment and vengeance fueling them onward, tensions exploded unpredictably within small towns around the area as news churned. Ranchers shared whispers about sightings of group formations emerging from rugged terrains while trailing unfamiliar vehicles that looked far too suspicious along dirt roads leading to farms' gates. It elicited anxiety wherever people gathered, fears escalating beyond perceived physical threats but extending into how close communities might tear apart under duress. With each interaction Jake had amidst this growing hostility, unflinching resolve bloomed against recognition that warfare extended beyond conventional tactics towards calculating marginal gains. Even warring parties could come equipped, armed not just with weapons but systematic cunning meant to exploit opportunities when least expected. Under slivers of moonlight breaking through clouds, patrolling above him like watchful eyes observing intentions hidden amid darkness alike, sunsets fading away encouraged ambition. A relentless flame drove him toward action lit from what he recognized needed defending. His way of life slapped with direct challenges far exceeding mundane cattle management encountered previously, every day tending nurturing livestock. The looming hostility crept closer, shifting its grip while intertwining personal vendettas dauntingly level-headed, caught alongside escalation fueled by criminal enterprises seeking power across borders. Each motivation converged into pointing toward one unmistakable truth: conflict was coming and preparedness would determine who survived amid chaos. Intertwining pressure at skewed odds nudging toward inevitable confrontations ready await unraveling edge brimming screams embedded along allegiance drawn sharper than steel itself. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm glow over Jake Larson's ranch as he went about his evening routine. The peace of the moment was deceiving, masking the impending storm that lurked just beyond the horizon. Unbeknownst to Jake, a group of cartel members was on the move, intent on launching an ambush that would disrupt the tranquility of his life forever. The cartel had meticulously planned their attack. They had spent days observing Jake's routines, noting when he tended to his livestock and when he retreated into the safety of his home. Underestimating him as just another rancher, they positioned themselves strategically around the property, for armed men who believed they were ready to eliminate a lone adversary with little effort. As dusk fell, shadows lengthened across the landscape, providing the perfect cover for their advance. They approached in silence, moving like phantoms through the tall grass that bordered the fields. Their leader motioned to his crew with subtle gestures, signaling them to take their positions while they maintained a tight formation. The plan was simple: create an overwhelming element of surprise by attacking swiftly and decisively. Jake was finishing up feeding the last of his cattle when a sudden noise broke the stillness, a rustling sound that sent a chill down his spine. Instinctively, he turned toward the direction of the disturbance just as gunfire erupted. The sharp cracks of gunshots shattered the evening calm, and bullets whizzed past him, striking nearby fence posts and kicking up dirt around him. In that split second before chaos unfolded, Jake's military training kicked in. He dropped instinctively behind a nearby tractor for cover, heart pounding but mind racing with clarity. The attackers had not expected this rancher to fight back. They believed they would catch him off guard and intimidate him into submission, but Jake was no ordinary rancher. He was a decorated Delta Force sniper with years of combat experience under his belt. Peering cautiously over the edge of the tractor, Jake quickly assessed his surroundings. He could see 3 cartel members advancing toward him from different angles. Their confidence radiated through their movements as they shouted commands to one another in Spanish. They were aiming to close in on him and cut off any escape routes. Now more than ever, it was critical for him to stay calm and think strategically. Drawing upon years of training in combat scenarios, Jake formulated a plan. Instead of retreating further into hiding, he decided to use his knowledge of terrain to his advantage. He grabbed his rifle from its concealed position beneath a tarp on the tractor and took aim at one of the advancing attackers who had strayed too close. With steady hands and focused breathing, he squeezed the trigger. One shot rang out and found its mark. The man crumpled to the ground before even realizing he was under fire. The cartel's bravado shattered instantly. Surprise transformed into chaos as they scrambled for cover. Jake took advantage of their disarray. He moved swiftly from cover to cover, using every piece of equipment and structure on his property as both shield and vantage point. Another attacker emerged from behind a rock formation, only to be met with another well-placed shot from Jake's rifle. 2 down, he thought to himself as adrenaline surged through him, but there were still 2 more left, and they were beginning to regroup. The remaining cartel members exchanged frantic glances before attempting to change tactics. They decided to circle around in hopes of flanking him from 2 sides simultaneously. They fired blindly in Jake's direction, bullets ricocheting off metal structures and sending splinters flying. But their shots lacked precision, fueled more by fear than calculated intent. Jake knew he had seconds before they found their footing again. He had fought too hard and too long in battles before this moment not to seize it fully. Now that he focused on one last target, still trying to maneuver behind boulders for cover, and aimed carefully once more. As he pulled the trigger again, the shot echoed like thunder during an approaching storm. He felt a powerful sense of purpose surge through him like electricity coursing across open fields alive with energy. With each success came renewed strength. It invigorated him further while pushing boundaries once thought contained within limits, unyielding along edges where realities clashed. Unrelenting, fiercely woven narratives spun together amidst trepidation, battling forth against one another, fiercely clashing, resolutely igniting flames brightly along paths forged anew, paving forward gallantly onward, rising up against darkness, emerging evermore, staged, delivered trials, faced, inspiring fervent spirits. Rekindled, emboldened souls, united, ignited, alive, rejoicing, boldly, triumphantly, reclaiming lives left shattered, scattered amidst chaos, arising, reborn anew, weaving dreams bright, navigating expansive horizons, fierce victories cherished, lived deeply, beckoning forth, calling, inviting whatever must come next, rippling waves coursing across vast expanses, lifting spirits soaring upward, rising along gentle winds, guiding onward, weaving lives beautifully entwined, eternally blossoming forth, always reaching. Daringly, boldly chasing brighter tomorrows, tracing paths ever drawn onward, illuminating beautifully vast canvases painted wondrously alive, with only one attacker remaining now. Desperate fury but not yet broken determination seeking vengeance propelled them forward. Jake bore witness firsthand how resilience flourished amid seemingly insurmountable odds, beckoning forward, unfurling limitless possibilities, awaiting discovery, enriched, binding journeys awaiting fulfillment, woven eternally stitched together, onward forever, coloring lives illuminated brightly. As the gunfire echoed across the ranch, Jake Larson's heart raced, not from fear but from a surge of adrenaline and instinct. He had trained for moments like this, moments where composure turned chaos into opportunity. The ambush set by the cartel was far from a fair fight, yet Jake had an edge they did not anticipate: his military training. Instinctively, Jake calculated his next moves. He knew he needed to leverage the terrain to his advantage. The vast expanses of his ranch could provide ample cover if used wisely. His mind raced through years of tactical training: how to flank an enemy, how to use shadows, how to draw them into a vulnerable position. With 2 attackers down and 2 still lurking, Jake scanned his surroundings. The tractor provided solid cover. But he needed to move quickly before the remaining cartel members regained their composure and regrouped. He grabbed his rifle and surveyed the area. To his left, the barn stood tall, its large doors slightly ajar. It could serve as an excellent vantage point if he reached it undetected. Jake took a deep breath and steadied himself. He knew that silence was as valuable as firepower in this scenario. He slipped out from behind the tractor and dashed low across the ground toward the barn, keeping close to the shadows cast by the setting sun. Every step was calculated, every sound meticulously monitored. He paid attention to the rustle of grass and the distant call of birds. As he neared the barn, he spotted movement. A cartel member was trying to flank him from behind a pile of hay bales. Jake's instincts kicked in again. He dropped low and rolled behind another structure, allowing him to keep an eye on the cartel member without being seen. The man was unaware of how close he was to a predator. Waiting in silence, Jake pulled out a small tactical device he always carried on him, a compact laser sight, fitting it onto his rifle with practiced ease. This would give him added accuracy in dim light conditions, crucial for what lay ahead. He took aim at the cartel member, now peering around for signs of where Jake might be hiding. With steady hands and focused determination, he squeezed the trigger once more. The shot rang true, hitting its mark squarely in the chest. The cartel member fell without a sound, finally losing that air of confidence that had fueled their attack. Now, with only one remaining attacker left and knowing they would soon regroup, Jake realized that he needed to change tactics once again. He decided to draw them out instead of waiting for them to come at him blindly. Using his voice, something he hadn't relied on during combat, he called out into the gathering dusk, taunting them with clever remarks laced with bravado. "Is that all you've got?" he shouted, trying to mask any sign of fear while provoking their pride. "I thought you were tougher than this." The remaining cartel member responded with a barrage of bullets aimed at his last known position. It was precisely what Jake had hoped for. It revealed their location while also providing him with critical information about their movements. With renewed energy coursing through him, Jake moved swiftly but silently around the barn's perimeter. He knew where they would be heading next. The direction of his voice would lead them away from strategic cover and into open space where they would be vulnerable. As they approached cautiously toward what they thought was an easy target, Jake prepared himself at a higher vantage point atop some crates stacked within the barn's loft area. From here, he could see everything, the wide open field surrounding him and every shadow moving across it. The final cartel member emerged from behind a fence post. Just as Jake had anticipated, unguarded and thinking he had found his mark, Jake steadied his breath once more as he aimed carefully. He knew this shot could end it all. "Goodbye," he whispered under his breath before pulling the trigger one last time. The sound echoed powerfully through the still air as time seemed to slow in those final moments. The bullet traced its path through silence before striking true once again. The last attacker crumpled against the ground, finally silencing any threat that lingered over his land. With adrenaline slowly dissipating and reality settling back in around him, Jake climbed down from his perch within the loft of the barn and stepped cautiously into the fading light outside. The aftermath lay before him, a stark reminder of both violence and survival intertwined on this land where peace had existed just hours earlier. Yet even amid chaos spun beautifully around him now lay purpose rekindled, igniting passions long buried deep within. A renewed sense of determination rose forth, shimmering against darkened skies, beckoning ever onward toward brighter tomorrows ahead filled with promise woven alongside memories lost forever beneath fierce storms. Fought bravely, reclaiming lives, shaped anew, reborn under starlit skies, illuminating paths, unfurling wide, inviting journeys awaited. As the sun dipped below the horizon, darkness enveloped Jake Larson's ranch, and the air thickened with tension. The remaining cartel member, now alone and desperate, tried to rally his confidence, but fear flickered behind his eyes. He had seen his comrades fall, one by one, to the skilled marksman who held the high ground. In a haphazard display of bravado, he shouted threats into the night, believing that sheer volume would intimidate his opponent. "Come out and face me, coward," he bellowed, his voice shaky yet defiant. "You can't hide forever." Jake remained silent atop the barn loft, watching through his scope as the thug paced back and forth beneath him. He thought about how misguided this man was. The cartel member's reliance on brute force and intimidation was a stark contrast to Jake's precision and strategy. This wasn't just about weapons, it was a battle of wits and experience, from his vantage point, Jake could see everything. The contours of the landscape that had become so familiar to him over the years, the shadows playing tricks in the fading light. He adjusted his grip on the rifle, feeling the cool metal against his palm. Every breath he took was measured, slow. He was in command of this moment. The thug lunged toward a nearby stack of hay bales, believing that movement might give him an edge. But as he shifted from cover to cover in a reckless charge, an act of desperation rather than strategy, Jake felt a sense of calm wash over him. This was where his training kicked in. Years spent in combat had instilled in him not just skill with a rifle but also patience under pressure. With each step the thug took toward Jake's position, he further exposed himself. Unbeknownst to him, Jake had already calculated his trajectory and timing. Instead of rushing into action like a novice soldier would, Jake waited for the perfect moment when the thug would stand still just long enough for a clean shot. Suddenly, the cartel member paused behind a wooden fence post and began firing blindly in Jake's direction. Bullets ricocheted off metal structures nearby with pops and splinters flying into the air. His aim was erratic, fueled by fear rather than focus, making it easy for Jake to remain undetected. Ignoring the chaos below him, Jake took a deep breath, keeping his eyes trained on the man's movements. He waited until the thug stepped out from behind cover, his stance revealing an opening that Jake had been waiting for. With a gentle squeeze of the trigger, Jake released a shot that rang through the night like a thunderclap, a singular sound amidst chaos that echoed back through the vastness of his land. The bullet struck true, hitting its target squarely in the shoulder. The thug dropped his weapon with a cry of pain, stumbling back against the wooden fence before sliding down to the ground. For a brief moment, silence enveloped the ranch again as the air became heavy with disbelief at how quickly their plans had unraveled. The weight of fear choked out any remnants of bravado as reality set in for what remained of the cartel forces. They were no match for this lone defender who had turned their attacks against them with chilling efficiency. Jake didn't waste time reveling in his victory. He knew there was still work to do. Before he could even catch his breath after taking down another attacker, adrenaline surged through him again as he scanned for any remaining threats on his property. The remaining cartel member was limping away now, an attempt to escape after witnessing exactly what they were up against. But it wouldn't end like that. Not on his watch. Jake leaped down from the loft with calculated speed and slipped around after him from behind cover. His heart raced, not out of fear but from exhilaration. He felt alive in ways that only combat could bring forth. He wanted this confrontation to be over once and for all. A swift resolution ensuring peace returned to this land threatened by violence. As he rounded an old tractor parked near the edge of his property line, Jake caught sight of the last thug trying to make an escape towards thick brush bordering his ranch. Drawing closer to where shadows melded into darkness, waiting patiently. It was time for one final standoff. Stop, Jake called out firmly, voice commanding yet steady, a relinquishing declaration echoing through night air, breaking silence anew, asserting dominance, demanding respect, asserting boundaries drawn clear between predator versus prey. Turning around abruptly at hearing someone call out clearly jolted panic through their veins. The last cartel member hesitated just long enough for Jake to take aim precisely again, aiming low, knowing strength now reliant upon velocity bringing forth unyielding force. Targeting, closing distance rapidly narrowing between them, sharp focus burned brightly, unparalleled finely honed instincts guiding movements amid lingering chaos, roiling forth courageously onward. The final shot rang loudly. Another life cut short as justice reclaimed its rightful place across land, born from struggle etched within histories, bearing witness, enduring focus, unwavering striking balance, while resilience persevered, tested against devouring darkness, longing fiercely, seeking light ever beckoning, bright inviting, shadows swirling away, reclaiming clarity filled anew, planted firmly, roots extending, promises, lives ready awaiting renewal, rising boldly, joined, flourishing, woven together, reaching toward futures bright, calling ever forward, yearning tomorrows, imbued hope ever growing. The aftermath of the attack settled heavily on both Jake Larson and the cartel, leaving scars that would resonate far beyond the immediate violence of that night. As dawn approached and the first light illuminated the remnants of chaos that had unfolded, Jake surveyed his ranch with a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. Although he had successfully defended his home, the toll of the confrontation weighed on him significantly. Jake took inventory of the damage left behind. The barn doors hung ajar, splintered from stray gunfire, and spent shell casings littered the ground like fallen leaves, bloodstains marred the earth. Stark reminders of what had transpired, a violent clash that had upended his once peaceful life. He felt a knot in his stomach as he contemplated the injuries sustained by the assailants. While he had acted in self-defense, he also bore the weight of having taken lives. The psychological impact was undeniable. Although Jake had trained for combat situations, experiencing violence at close range was different from theoretical scenarios. Memories flashed before him. The faces of the men he had shot, their cries echoing in his mind like haunting specters. The lines between right and wrong blurred in the heat of battle. He wondered if he could ever fully shake off this new reality he had been thrust into, where survival meant taking drastic actions against others. As the sun rose higher, casting a warm glow across the landscape, Jake grappled with feelings of isolation and vulnerability. He felt an acute awareness of how quickly peace could be shattered despite having emerged victorious. An unsettling sense of foreboding replaced any fleeting sense of triumph. The quietness surrounding him now seemed ominous. He knew that retaliation from the cartel was likely inevitable. Meanwhile, back at their hideout, the remaining cartel members regrouped. The air was thick with tension as they assessed their losses. 2 men dead, 1 wounded, and their leader fled into the shadows. Anger surged among them. They had gone into this attack with confidence but were now faced with humiliation at being outmaneuvered by a mere rancher. The cartel's reputation depended on instilling fear in those they sought to control. Losing members to a single opponent undermined their power. Frustration boiled over as they blamed one another for the failed ambush. They exchanged heated words, each trying to shift blame while plotting revenge against Jake. Their desperation fueled discussions about more aggressive tactics, likely involving greater numbers and perhaps heavier weaponry next time. The cartel could not appear weak. They needed to assert dominance quickly before word spread about their failure. Reports of the incident would inevitably circulate through nearby communities, and whispers of Jake's resistance would spark curiosity and fear alike. Some might rally around him, emboldened by his actions, while others would be terrified of attracting attention from a vengeful cartel back at his ranch. Jake's instinct to fortify his defenses kicked in. He began inspecting access points around his property and mending damaged fences. Tasks that took on new urgency as he realized he could no longer view his home as an impenetrable fortress. With each repair completed, however, doubts lingered. Would it be enough to deter another attack? Would he have time to prepare if they returned? As days turned into weeks following the confrontation, Jake found himself caught in a cycle of hypervigilance. Every creak of wood or rustle of leaves sent adrenaline coursing through him. He avoided running errands into town or engaging with neighbors out of fear they might inadvertently expose him to danger. The emotional toll weighed heavily on his relationships. The distance growing between him and those who cared for him became palpable. Friends expressed concern about his well-being but found it increasingly difficult to reach out to someone wrapped tightly in anxiety and paranoia. With every passing sunset, Jake's resolve strengthened even as shadows lengthened across his land. He knew he could not remain isolated. He needed allies. If he were to face whatever might come next, the ranch represented not just a piece of land but a legacy worth fighting for and preserving at all costs. Determined to reclaim his life amidst uncertainty and fear that threatened to engulf him whole, he began formulating plans not just for defense but also for community outreach. A gathering to share stories and unite local ranchers under common purpose, aiming toward resilience amid adversity looming quietly ahead. Thus began a new chapter for Jake Larson. One not merely defined by violence but colored by renewed determination to stand firm against threats without losing sight of compassion cultivated deeply within, shared experiences woven together through kindness against chaos while nurturing bonds anew, rooting firmly grounded hope, flourishing vibrant among interconnected lives, calling forth brighter tomorrows, filled promise blooming ever brightly, illuminating pathways reaching for futures forged boldly ahead. As the news of the attack on Jake Larson's ranch spread through the surrounding communities, a palpable tension enveloped Cedar Ridge and its neighboring areas. What had once seemed like a distant threat now loomed ominously over lives that had long been defined by peace, hard work, and camaraderie. Each resident felt the ripple effects of the violence, and conversations turned serious almost overnight. The local diner, where townsfolk gathered for their morning coffee, the atmosphere was heavy with anxiety. Farmers and Ranchers exchanged stories of perceived threats and shared their fears about the potential for cartel violence to spill over into their own lives. "If they can come after Jake like that," an elder rancher named Tom lamented, shaking his head, "then who's to say we're not next?" Conversations were punctuated with nervous laughter, but beneath it lay a current of concern that everyone could feel. However, amid growing fears, support for Jake also took root in the community. Many residents admired his bravery and resilience. He had become a figure of hope in a time of uncertainty. The story of how one man stood against multiple attackers resonated deeply, inspiring others who had previously felt powerless in the face of escalating cartel aggression. "He showed us that we can fight back," asserted Clara Sanchez, whose family had farmed in the area for generations. "We can't let them take our land or our dignity." As weeks passed, local residents mobilized around Jake's experience, forming committees to discuss collective safety measures. They organized community meetings to ensure everyone was informed about what had occurred and how they could respond together. Neighbors united in their desire to protect not only their homes but also the larger fabric of their community. These gatherings served as both a platform for sharing strategies and a therapeutic release for those grappling with fear. The shared stories morphed into a tapestry woven from personal histories filled with both past struggles and aspirations for a future free from intimidation. During one such meeting at the community center, residents outlined plans for neighborhood watch programs and shared tips on fortifying their properties. It became clear that individuals were willing to invest time and resources into ensuring their safety alongside one another. Despite this newfound sense of support and camaraderie, anxiety lingered regarding potential retaliation from the cartel. Community leaders urged law enforcement to take action. Calls intensified for increased patrols and investigations into cartel activities within their area. Residents illustrated their frustrations at town hall meetings where citizens pressed officials on how they planned to protect them from further threats. The sheriff's office listened attentively. Concerns echoed around the room as families recounted tales of intimidation they had faced over time. Determined to maintain order, authorities promised more visible patrols while also asking residents to remain vigilant about reporting any suspicious activity that might indicate cartel presence. Meanwhile, Jake tried to navigate his own feelings regarding this wave of communal awareness growing around him. While grateful for the support, he wrestled with guilt over having put his neighbors at risk simply through his actions defending his home. Their willingness to rally around him offered solace but was tempered by an understanding that they could face consequences for supporting him, a reality heightened by his own understanding of how quick retaliation could erupt. As he began discussing with fellow ranchers methods for cultivation that wouldn't attract unwanted attention from unwelcome factions while still nurturing their livelihoods, the notion emerged that they might find ways to use their cooperative farming efforts to bolster defenses together without compromising independence, all while fostering solidarity grounded in common goals. Days turned into weeks as conversations continued across porches illuminated by soft twilight. Stories shared evoked emotions rich as families bonded over laughter interlaced among whispers, seeded hope renewed fresh among soil nurtured during evening harvests drawn forth, reclaimed pathways forged anew. Beckoning brighter tomorrows alive amid spiraling uncertainties yet untouched, grounded firmly toward shared humanity, yearning collectively, striving forward against odds. Bold boundless hearts ignited alive, inspired, chasing aspirations, collectively reaching toward futures painted vividly colorful, embracing rich new beginnings, heralding dawn. The escalating violence along the U.S.-Mexico border, exemplified by the attack on Jake Larson's ranch, underscores a profound and troubling reality for border security, governmental response, and the ongoing struggles against cartel influence in rural America. This incident was not an isolated event but rather a symptom of a broader crisis that threatens the safety and stability of communities situated in areas vulnerable to cartel activity. In light of the attack, there is an increasing recognition that effective border security cannot solely rely on physical barriers or traditional law enforcement methods. The cartel's ability to infiltrate rural areas and exert influence demonstrates the need for a multifaceted approach that encompasses intelligence gathering, community engagement, and comprehensive strategies aimed at curbing their operations. It is crucial to understand that cartels do not merely operate across borders, they establish deep-rooted networks within local communities, leveraging fear and intimidation to dominate The immediate aftermath of the violence has prompted local governments to re-evaluate their strategies for maintaining safety. Many residents are now vocal advocates for increased law enforcement presence, demanding more patrols and proactive measures to thwart cartel activities. The tensions visible in Cedar Ridge reflect a growing urgency among residents who feel they can no longer remain passive observers in their own lives. The call for intervention is echoed in town meetings as citizens recognize the necessity of merging community strength with law enforcement action. However, these discussions also reveal the complexities of navigating relationships between local authorities and residents. Historically, trust has been fragile due to perceptions of ineffectiveness in protecting rural communities. Local sheriff departments face resource limitations and bureaucratic constraints that hinder their ability to respond swiftly to threats. The community's demand for action highlights a paradox. While residents seek assistance from law enforcement, there remains an inherent skepticism about whether such interventions will be timely and effective. In addition to immediate calls for action, the implications of Jake's confrontation reverberate through broader societal contexts. As urban areas grapple with the fallout from cartel influence, rural communities are increasingly viewed as battlegrounds by both criminals and government forces. The notion that violence could erupt in remote landscapes challenges stereotypes about crime being confined to urban centers, forcing a re-evaluation of how resources are distributed across regions. Moreover, those who witness or experience violence firsthand often endure long-lasting psychological repercussions. Jake's experience not only affects him but also has a ripple effect on his neighbors. Witnessing the aftermath of violence can foster collective trauma within communities, leading to heightened anxiety and hypervigilance. This psychological burden amplifies feelings of vulnerability among residents, driving them further into isolation and impacting their daily routines. As Jake grapples with his own trauma, haunted by memories of the encounter, he also becomes a symbol of resilience for others facing similar fears. His ability to defend his home signifies that resistance is possible, igniting hope within the community while also drawing attention from those who might have previously felt powerless. However, it also raises questions about how long such individual acts of bravery can sustain motivation without broader systemic change. Moving forward, it is imperative for local leaders to connect community efforts with government initiatives aimed at disrupting cartel operations, engaging residents in preventative strategies, such as providing resources for self-defense training, establishing communication networks for reporting suspicious activity, and creating neighborhood watch programs, can empower individuals while fostering a sense of belonging. Strengthening these bonds may help counteract feelings of isolation and fear lingering after incidents of violence. As conversations continue around these crucial issues, Jake finds himself at the center of a community determined to reclaim their lives from the shadows cast by cartel presence. The collective awakening among residents brings a renewed sense of purpose. They begin crafting plans that reflect both their desire for safety and their unwillingness to succumb to fear any longer. Ultimately, how Cedar Ridge responds to this incident will set a precedent for neighboring communities facing similar threats. In challenging times such as these, unity often emerges as the most powerful antidote against despair. Together, they aim not only to protect their land but also to build a foundation resilient against all forms of adversity, a testament that terror can indeed be met with courage when faced head-on by those united in purpose striving toward brighter tomorrows together. Jake Larson's journey from a civilian rancher to a defender against cartel violence encapsulates a harrowing transformation. Once a man focused on cultivating his land and raising livestock, he now finds himself at the center of an escalating conflict that has thrust him into a role he never anticipated. The attack on his ranch not only awakened his dormant military training but also highlighted the fragility of peace along the U.S.-Mexico border, an area increasingly marred by the insidious grasp of organized crime. In the immediate aftermath of the confrontation, Jake wrestled with complex emotions, relief tinged with guilt as he reflected on the lives lost that night. The psychological weight of having taken lives in self-defense weighed heavily on him. He grappled with the haunting memories, questioning whether he could ever fully reconcile his past and present. This internal struggle is emblematic of the broader turmoil facing communities like Cedar Ridge, where residents are forced to confront their vulnerabilities in a landscape once defined by stability and routine. The incident served as a catalyst for local residents, igniting a collective awareness of their precarious situation. In the face of rising cartel influence, fear became a unifying force, driving neighbors to support one another as they navigated the uncertain terrain of life under threat. Meetings held in community centers transformed from mere exchanges of information into powerful gatherings that fostered solidarity. Neighbors who once maintained a comfortable distance from one another began to bond over shared experiences and fears, recognizing that their resilience depended on unity. Yet, despite this newfound camaraderie, the looming specter of retaliation from the cartel cast a long shadow over their efforts. As Jake fortified his defenses and engaged with local law enforcement, the conversation shifted toward proactive measures, how to deter future attacks and maintain the safety of their homes. Residents called for increased patrols and support from authorities. Recognizing that they needed more than just vigilance, they required actionable steps to safeguard their way of life. The implications of such violence extend far beyond individual ranches or towns. They ripple through society at large. The cartel's ability to infiltrate rural areas signifies a profound threat not just to those living in proximity but to national security overall. As policymakers grapple with responses to these challenges, it becomes apparent that addressing organized crime requires a multifaceted approach that encompasses law enforcement, community engagement, and systemic change. For Jake and his neighbors, this ongoing battle against cartel influence signals a pivotal moment in defining their future. They are no longer passive victims but active participants in reclaiming their autonomy. By engaging with local leaders and advocating for resources that empower them as a united front, they are forging a path forward marked by resilience rather than fear. Looking ahead, the lessons learned from Jake's confrontation may serve as a blueprint for other communities grappling with similar threats. His story illustrates that individual acts of bravery can ignite collective action and inspire hope amidst adversity. The transformation from isolation to solidarity is not merely about survival, it reflects an enduring human spirit determined to reclaim dignity and safety. As Jake stands on the precipice between his past and an uncertain future, he is resolute in his commitment to protecting not only his land but also the community that rallied around him. This journey signifies more than just a fight against organized crime. It embodies the struggle for identity, a shared commitment to preserving way of life against forces seeking to undermine it. In conclusion, Jake Larson's experience highlights the ongoing battle against organized crime not merely as an isolated incident but as part of a broader narrative that connects individuals, communities, and governments alike. The courage displayed by one man can resonate through an entire region, inspiring unity in action against common threats. As communities band together in this struggle, they create ripples of change that may ultimately reshape their futures, fostering hope while reaching for brighter tomorrows filled with promise and possibility.